Hello and welcome back to another Real with Ryan interview. Today I had the pleasure of speaking with Riley McGill. Riley is another one of my friends, but he's also a musician, an artist, an entrepreneur, and just a really awesome creative person. In today's episode, we talk about Riley's story. We talked about how he discovered some of his passions as a child and some of the ways he got into drawing with pen and paper, some of the ways he got into cooking, and of course, the story behind his budding music career. This is a really fun, wide ranging conversation where we discuss all these things and have a blast talking along the way. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy this interview with none other than Riley McGill. Okay, we are live. Riley, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, from the intro, I'm sure you've gathered a little bit about Riley. He's a longtime friend of mine. We might discuss a little bit today about our past and tennis. And Riley was one of the members of our Rogers High School tennis team when we got state runner up, I believe, for the Mounties. But before jumping in to that type of stuff, I did want to start off the conversation by asking something a little bit random. And one thing I will say is we'll have all of Riley's handles and information, as well as Spotify links to listen to his music and his website in the description, so you can check that out. But one thing, Riley, that I remember from just watching your Instagram stories time and time again is you cooking, I think it's called eggs in a basket, or basically a piece of toast where you cut the hole out of the center and cook a egg in the middle of it. And I remember seeing these. It felt like every single day for I don't know. I don't know the time. It felt like 3 years in a row and you were just perfecting this. So, wanted to ask, are you still cooking eggs in a basket, or are there any other breakfasts or meals that have just been a go-to for you?
Yeah, so eggs in a basket. First off, I think there are a lot of different names for it that a lot of people. So like I've talked to some people. I grew up, and it's not like I ate it that much when I was younger, but I've always known it as an egg in a basket. I think some people say egg in the hole, or just there are a lot of different names for it. But yeah, you literally, and like I said, I was trying to perfect it almost. It was like I did it a few times. But what I think started it was the fact that whenever COVID happened in March of 2020, obviously everyone was spending a lot of time at home, but specifically I started working from home around that time. And so for the first time, I was like, I could wake up in the morning, be working, and then also cook breakfast, whereas I used to be, in an office actually. And so it was like I started just wanting to get creative with all my breakfast, and then I started doing those again. I was like, oh, I remember doing this whenever I was younger. And then, yeah, I think almost, I don't want to say every day, but it was like I would literally just I usually make two of them, but you take a piece of bread and I would take like a glass or a cup or something and you like stamp it almost like it's a cookie cutter and you get a perfect hole in the middle of the bread. Take that out and then you fry an egg and you can cook it however you want. So you like leave it runny or whatever. And then you fry the little piece of bread that you cut out as well. And then you use that for dipping. And I would,
Oh,
oh yeah, exactly. And I would do that, take a picture, put it on my Instagram, just as fun. Like at the beginning, I was just doing it for fun, but then people started responding to it, and people would actually start making their own eggs in a basket, and they would tag me, and I would like rate it and be like, "Oh, that's a 10 out of 10," or "That's great." And so it just became this thing that was, I don't know, entertaining during COVID for me. But I was trying to get creative. I'd make it a certain way. I'd like do different toppings or whatever, and
mm,
whatever keeps you sane, I guess, whenever you're at home
yeah.
all the time.
I over quarantine, over the quote COVID at home stay. I did my fair share of just strange things that kept me sane. A quick question, follow up on the eggs in a basket. What is there's might not be a perfect answer here, but what types of things separates just a good egg in a basket from like the top tier fantastic eggs and baskets?
That's a very good question. It's all in the finesse of the flip. Specifically, if you
Uh,
thick enough bread. So like Wonder Bread might not do you right. There's a place here in Fayetteville called Stone Mill. I was like buying different kinds of breads just like try and get it thicker. That way, whenever you crack the egg in there, you have to let it cook enough on the bottom side first before you flip it. And then if you flip right, you don't get as much like overflow on the other side. Otherwise, it just looks like a big
mm,
blob on the bread. You want a clean line. And so there's a I think the aesthetic, but then, like I said, if you leave it just I like my eggs a little bit runny still, because then you can take
mhm.
the bread that you cook on the side, dip it in there, and I think that's what separates it out.
Yeah. Hey, that sounds delicious. Yeah, I might have to go and make an egg in a basket after this. Try my
I'm
hand at
yeah,
it. Well, we're definitely going to get into music and things like that. I do want to ask just another question though about cooking.
yeah.
So, as part of COVID or quarantine, you got had some more time, explored cooking, being a little more creative with it. Are you someone that cooks frequently? Is that, a part of your life and lifestyle, or was it just that, one season you were, particularly just interested in breakfast?
Yeah, I think, I've always since I was young, I've always liked cooking breakfast food, so, like, I kinda learned how to cook eggs and used to love scrambled eggs and all that kinda stuff, so I've always been good at cooking breakfast food, and was super into that. I didn't cook that much through college, honestly. I was either living in a dorm where I had a meal plan, or another house with a bunch of people that we had another meal plan through that. And so once I got my own house at the end of college,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh gosh, I need to learn how to buy groceries for just cooking for myself. And then specifically after college, once I graduated, got a lot more into it. But I think, yeah, there was something that happened where it became used to be just something that was a necessity, but then I started learning how to kind of actually enjoy it. And there is a creative aspect to it of if you stop just following like specific recipes and just actually try and learn, what it is you're doing. There's a guy on YouTube, which I don't know. I know you're pretty um, into cooking, so I don't know if you've seen Kinji Lopez Alt on YouTube. But
I
he's,
haven't.
you're gonna have to check him out. He's an incredible chef. Um, that basically I don't know when he started making YouTube videos, but he owned restaurants. I think a couple different restaurants, and I'm not sure where he lives now. But basically, he puts a GoPro on his head and then
Ah.
will cook, and so it's like a POV, but he does it real time. So he's not like editing it out. So you literally get to watch him. If he's cooking pasta,
Mhm.
he shows you and he talks about the science behind it, and so there's more understanding of like instead of just somebody telling you what to do, he's telling you why putting pasta water in something creates a sauce because of the stuff that actually makes it thicken up and stuff like that, where I was like, oh, if I actually learn what's going on, then I can get creative with it and actually go make my own stuff rather than always
Mm.
just having to look up something online to do it. So yeah, there's like a enjoyment that's kind of uh, come out of it. So much to the fact that this year I'm basically people are my family's like, "What do you want for Christmas?" And I'm asking for like pepper grinders and like a chef knife and stuff. So yeah, it's like it's kind of taken over my life, I think. But yeah,
Yeah, that's cool. No, I didn't recognize the name, but when you said, the guy who has a GoPro on his head, I've seen a few of those videos. I think the funny thing is I've particularly seen him make like kind of either drunken late night
yeah,
snack type stuff, and he'll make egg sandwiches and things like that. So I've seen a few of those, and they're really inspiring.
oh
And
yeah,
I'm in the same boat about the food. I love to cook in the process of learning, and yeah, pretty much every Christmas for the last 4 years has just been a knife of
yeah,
some sort or a apron. Or yeah, last year, yeah, I laughed. I literally asked for a pepper grinder last year. So um got a nice long wooden pepper grinder. I've been loving it. So one more question about the food and cooking, just to satisfy my own curiosity. What does do you have kind of a structure for the food you eat in a given week? Are you cooking most of your meals at home, Are you eating out? Is it mix and match, a meal plan? Do you have any kind of structure or thought with how you just do meals on any particular week?
I'm really bad about like planning ahead with food, but I also get really tired of the same food if I eat it too much in a row. So meal prepping specifically has not really ever worked for me. I tried doing it a
Mm,
little bit more um, whenever I was working full time in the office. Still kind of doing that, but obviously things have changed since after the pandemic. But I can remember, especially whenever I was like spending 5 days a week. In the office, it was kind of like sometimes I'd go out, sometimes I'd make my own food. But after you get home at like 5 p.m. from working all day, sometimes it's difficult.
mhm,
Sometimes you don't even want to cook.
mhm,
What I have found that I really enjoy is like if I just see something like, say, I watch a Kenji video on YouTube, something like that. Sometimes I'll have enough stuff at my house to where I just need to go buy one or two things to do that. And I really, even that, I really enjoy just going to the store to like try and get one or two ingredients,
mhm,
going home and making it. So no, I'm a little bit more spontaneous. I'm not very structured, which is kind of weird because a lot of stuff in other parts of my life, I'm very structured down to a T. But when it comes to cooking, I think I'm trying to master the art of really not wasting anything that's in your fridge. Like I'll buy, something like specifically produce, and then it's hard to use all of it. And so I'm trying to learn how to get the most out of
mhm.
groceries and that kind of thing, which obviously you want to be as have little waste as possible, but there's kind of a skill to that to work up to it. So
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I feel like, even for some of the most structured people, like having some areas in your life that just is off limits and out of bounds to structure can be almost like freeing in a way. And
it's
great.
actually a good thing, I think. So
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks for asking or answering those questions about cooking. I love cooking, and hearing how other people think about it, approach it is awesome. And yeah, maybe I'll tag you in an egg basket in the next couple of days.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
seriously, man, I don't think I've made one in like a year now. So you're inspiring me to. I think that's what's gonna happen tomorrow morning. Don't be
get
surprised.
get it back. Yeah. Well, I do want to talk about. So you mentioned about cooking. It sounded like as a kid, you tried cooking some breakfasts, pretty early on. And then, later in life, kind of found yourself doing it, more and cooking more. I'm curious when it comes to other types of creative work, such as, drawing or penciling. Was that something that you also ended up you was that something you did as a child as well, or is that something that strictly came along later in your life into high school, college, post college age?
Yeah, it's kind of a big theme, I guess I would say, whenever it comes to a lot of the creative um, things in my life specifically. So I grew up. I was basically always that kid who would be drawing, had a sketchbook. Like again, just like for that, my Christmas list was always, or at least my stocking stuffers, it was always like colored pencils, a new sketchbook. That was what kind of fed me and kept me going. And so my family really encouraged that. And so I was always drawing, always wanted to do that. Eventually,
Mhm.
I did some art lessons for a little while because I was just like begging because I was doing everything kind of just on my own, copying books and stuff. And I was like, what if I could
Mhm.
get somebody who actually knew what they were doing to show me how to do this? And so I was always really passionate about that, specifically whenever I can't remember exactly how old, but I liked drawing. But then there was a point where I was at one of the art classes. They were doing, I think it was a painting that day. And me being the stubborn kid that I was and still am, I was like, I don't really want to do that. And I didn't have a piece of paper. So I literally took a piece of a paper towel and I got like one of those little Sharpie fine tip pens. And I
Mhm.
drew like this plant that was in the corner on the paper towel. And the art teacher loved it actually. And then I took it home and my dad framed it and had it in his office at work for like a long, long time. And so I can think back to that. And that was like one of the first things with the fine tip pen specifically. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
where I veered into that style of, it doesn't have to be black and white, but just pen and paper, very detailed, like cross hatching, that kind of style of artwork.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where that grew out of. But yeah, it was to kind of answer where you were going with it, is that was very prevalent whenever I was really, really young. And then I think it kind of, not to say it dropped off, but I definitely did not do as much of it throughout high school or especially in college,
Mm-hmm.
the first part of college. And then something happened. I don't really, it's kind of a, we can talk more about it, but I just say there was this period of time right around also whenever I picked up the banjo for the first time. I just came back to it with a vengeance, almost like it was all of a sudden just this wave where I had been not doing it. And I was kind of like, why haven't I been doing this? And whenever music kind of came back to my life, and then it was like from there on, that creative side, whether or not it was the visual art or music,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of came back in a wave. And since then, it's kind of just piled on itself. But yeah, there was a lot of it when I was younger, kind of this blank period, and then I'm really happy it happened, but it just kind of came back, and so there were a lot of things that led to that. But yeah, it was this, it's an interesting pattern, I think.
Yeah, no, that is really cool. It sounds like, yeah, that pattern of discovering some things as a kid. It sounds like you're pretty lucky in finding, at least as a kid, some of these things that would emerge later on in your life and be kind of really fundamental to who you are.
Yeah,
Uh, which is pretty cool. Do you know, a question about that? Were your parents the type of parents that were encouraging you to try a lot of different things? Or did you just kind of happen to stumble into some of these, passions and things you'd be interested early on just kind of by happenstance? Were
yeah,
you pushed to, you know, test your comfort zone and stuff by your parents?
definitely always was pushed to try different things. Especially, I mean, whenever we were really a lot younger, like, so you and I played tennis together. I played tennis from whenever I was really young, but also played travel baseball. So a lot of it revolved around trying different sports. So, I mean, soccer, basketball, football. I never really got further than flag football when I was young, but basically did, every sport, you try all the different stuff. Um,
Hmm.
then whatever it was that we were doing, it's like, if you're going to choose this, you want to be able to dive into it and really, it's not the only thing you can do, but try and be the best at that or whatever it is that
Hmm.
you're doing. Whenever I started showing, I don't really know how young I was when I started drawing, but they were really like, really encouraging about that. My grandfather specifically would always do like little doodles. And so he really encouraged that too. My family, not necessarily, they don't, I don't want to say they're not artistic at all. They don't draw. Nobody in my family really plays an instrument or anything like that. And so
Mm,
it wasn't exactly something that they said, here, try this. But whenever I did show an interest for it, they were like, oh, and then kind of pushed me in that direction. So yeah, it was, whether or not it was sports or, I don't know, like doing karate like class, it was like, if you're going to do it, really jump into it and don't, have to it. But
mhm.
yeah, it doesn't matter if they were necessarily, they didn't really know anything about music or anything like that, but they were like, yeah, jump into that. I was always surprised whenever I started playing music how much they were like, you should do that. And so
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, props to your parents. I know the McGills well,
yeah,
and so always happy to hear that they pushed you and encouraged you and supported you when you were showing interest towards stuff. That's really awesome.
yeah,
Um, you mentioned, and for those of you who haven't seen Riley's art, we'll link to Riley's website as well as Instagram. It's really worth checking out. So, the style you were talking about was, mostly ink on paper and this really, hash and style, very detailed kind of portraits of things, it seems. But, you know, Is there anything that you found about that style? It sounds like you found this kind of style by, drawing a plant on a paper towel, and it kind of, went from there. This focus towards that style. Do you know what it is about that style of art that is so much more appealing than, say, painting or other styles? Like, why is it that this particular style has really captured your attention? You've been able to take it and run with it.
Yeah, you know, I don't know specifically why that jumped out originally. Like I can think back, maybe one of the things that I knew I was always drawn to that style whenever I saw it other places. There
Mhm.
were some books called, I guess I actually have them on my shelf over here, the series of unfortunate events,
Yeah.
which I remember specifically the beginning of each of those chapters. There would always be like a little drawing of what was going to happen in that chapter.
Mhm.
And that was actually, I can remember, I'd have to look at what artist actually did those, but that was kind of in that style where it was very detailed and specifically that cross hatching, which, um, if anybody doesn't know what that is basically using a bunch of repeated lines in one direction and then doing the same thing in an opposite direction, crossing those, and it creates a difference in texture. It creates a difference in what you would basically call tone, so lighter versus darker. And people use it for shadows and creating a difference whenever you're doing that kind of drawing. And
Mhm.
that's used in a lot of different other types of things as well. But what I think was really cool about it is the fact that with a pen, you could draw something that all you're doing is drawing a bunch of lines in different directions. But whenever you're like, your nose is this close to the paper, and then you step back and you look at it, and once you're kind of like not looking in one spot, it looks like something completely different. Like if you're trying to draw a tree, just the if you do a certain pattern of cross hatching and then you step back, it looks like actual, even though you're not sitting there drawing individual leaves. Um, the fact that you can do that with black and white, where you're just creating a difference in tone, that's the thing you can spend your entire life trying to get better at. I've got books and books of artwork where you see these masters from hundreds of years ago who did that style, and it's like they worked their entire life to be able to do that, and it's extremely hard to do. And so I'm
Mhm.
always learning and trying to get better at that. But yeah, I think it's just the fact that um, I would actually like to get more into painting. That's not really what I specifically do a lot of. It's always been the pen and ink. I tend
Mhm.
to really focus on architectural subjects, that kind of thing, rather than I've done landscapes and stuff like that. But I always loved architecture whenever I was younger, and so um, used to draw floor plans and stuff. But I was always drawn to just straight lines, angles, stuff like that, and then kind of how that fit into the environment around them. So, yeah, I think it's just the specific style. I kind of stuck to it, and then I just started digging down deeper. And once you find something, you're like, I just want to keep trying to learn more about this. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Whenever you're doing those drawings now, so I don't know how much you're drawing these days. If that's you do some commissions. It looks like based from your website. I see some just drawings that look kind of leisurely pop up on your pages from now and then. How often are you drawing these days? And is that something that you're just doing for leisure? Are you doing it to practice the art? Are you doing it for work? Like, kind of what is, why are you drawing these days still primarily?
yeah, it's kind of a combination of everything. I think I was always drawing for myself whenever I was younger. There's this thing where whenever somebody else, it's different whenever you're drawing to, just for your own, like, it's okay if you mess up. Like if I'm the only
Mhm.
one where I'm sitting here drawing and like, if I mess up, yeah, it's disappointing, but it's okay because nobody else really had any expectations. But I was always super afraid of whenever somebody else would ask me to draw something for them. And so most of my life, I had never really done that. Like family members, I would draw stuff for them and, do a lot of that. But right after I graduated from college was around the time that I started doing a lot more kind of what I was talking about, where music started to take a lot more of a hold of my life. Visual art started coming back into it. And so as I would draw stuff. Again, it was still really just for me. I'd be
Mhm.
kind of getting back into it. I would, you know, I started posting it on Instagram, started posting online for other people to see. And then naturally, this weird thing happened where somebody would see it. They'd be like, "Oh, have you thought of doing this?" I'd be like, "Oh, that's a great idea." So I'd do it and share it. And then I started getting people asking me, like, "Oh, could you draw, say my old house that I grew up in for a gift?"
Mm.
And the first few times that happened, I was like, okay, if it's like a house, I've done a lot of those. I'm pretty confident. Um,
Mhm.
and there was just this weird, you just had to do it once to kind of get used to it and be like, okay, I've shown that I can, for myself, that I can do it. Because
Mhm.
there's nothing worse than, being afraid to like give something to somebody and be like, is this what you were hoping for? You don't want to let
Mhm.
them down. And then there's a step further where you're like, there's no way I could ask somebody for money for doing that. Um,
Yeah.
and so naturally, just kept on posting stuff, and then more and more, it just was to the point where people I didn't even know would reach out and be like, "Hey, can you do this?" And so it's kind of just a referral thing where I started getting a lot of people asking for commissions. And naturally, I was like, well, I think I could kind of turn this into a business. It's like I'm not doing it for the money, but at a certain point, it's like if I am going to be doing a lot of them, I got to kind of manage what it was. So I tried to put more structure to it. That was around the first time I ever created a website.
Mm.
Um, got into doing a lot of that, and so it just turned into this thing where uh, I went from always just kind of doing it for myself, and then I started pushing the boundaries to where somebody would be like, "Can you draw something of like this landscape, obscure?" And I'm like, "Well, I I'll take a risk and try it for you." And then I was just a little bit more not sure of myself, but I was like okay
Mhm.
with taking that risk and just kind of taking a step off the ledge there. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was a really cool evolution of how it just started rolling in that way.
Yeah, that's great. Um, do you whenever you are doing commissions for people, do you still have kind of the enjoyment of the process? Like, are you still getting as much out of it when you're drawing for someone else, even if it's, a paid commission, as if you were drawing for something for fun just for yourself?
Yeah, I think even just on that same point is like the fact that they're probably going to ask me to do something that I wouldn't have thought to do on my own. And so
Hmm.
I've done some like just random places, like different locations I probably wouldn't have ever thought to do, but somebody would ask me to do it. And so there's an enjoyment of kind of the unknown to where if I'm going out and picking something, I'm probably going to choose something that I'd be like, oh, I could probably do that. But if somebody gives me something that's
Mm,
a little bit more of a challenge and really forces me to, like, I'll just I'll start looking through my art books and be like, how has somebody else drawn something similar to this?
hmm.
I think that's how you learn is you look at other people and you try and imitate them, and then you find your own style through that. Um, but yeah, it's there's an enjoyment to doing commissions for other people. Whenever I started recording music and doing more on that side, it was a real joy because obviously with albums, there's usually artwork that goes along with it, and so the first EP I recorded, I drew the cover for that, and now even every song I do now or any project that I have for recording, generally I do all that on my own, whether or not it's a photograph that I use that I've taken or kind of do the graphic design for it, or if it's a drawing of mine. That's something that I kind of own that process and really enjoy doing. So yeah, it's a
Mm,
combinations of commissions. I sometimes I get bogged down with them and I kind of take a break from it, but yeah, it also
hmm.
goes along with the music as well. So
Yeah. Well, perfect. I don't see we've teased it a few times talking about the music. I've tried to delay it here for a little bit cuz I know that, music is a huge part of your life.
yeah,
Um but you mentioned, you're now doing artwork for your own music. It looks like I just checked Spotify a few minutes ago, and it looks like it was Past and Gone was your first album, and from what I could tell, Quarantine Blues was the first public song on Spotify. Is that correct?
yeah, that was the first one I ever released right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit about the journey through music that you've kind of began on. And so you talked a little bit earlier about your childhood and how you tried a handful of things. You found interest in cooking. You found your love for art and drawing and sketching really early on. All these different sports. You ended up being really good in playing tennis. um, was music something you said, you mentioned earlier you got your banjo not too long ago. Was music something you experienced early on in life, or is that something that really came later on through college or later?
Yeah, that was kind of a similar thing, kind of, I guess, with what I was talking about. That period, I would say basically high school and into college, where a lot of that was I'd kind of stopped. And so growing up, like I said, nobody in my family has really played an instrument, or at least my close family. I've got extended family members who are pretty musical, but at least from what I grew up with, it was all just listening to music. A
Mm,
lot of influence with what my mom and dad were always playing, either in the car or at the house, the kind of stuff we would listen to. So there was an influence, I think, building up there whenever I was a lot younger. Um, but really, I so kind of sixth grade was whenever you go to middle school, and at least for us, they would say you have to either do band, orchestra, or choir. You had to do one of those three. And so for me, I chose the trumpet, and it was what I at first I absolutely hated it, and I
mm,
was terrible at it, and I was just this terrible student. And then something happened about a few months in where I realized it was like a competition, because they would do the chairs, first, second, third, fourth, that kind of thing.
mhm,
And the minute I realized that I was going to be competing with people, I was like, oh, wait. And so I went home and just started like, that's kind of what started it. But that evolved into a really a big passion of mine, was playing the trumpet from about sixth grade to ninth grade. And so whenever you and I got to high school, obviously we were playing tennis. I was also in the band for freshman year of high school, and it got to the point where I was looking over in the stands at football games, and I'd be down, doing the marching band, and I'd see all my friends in the stand, and I was like, I really want to be up there. And so, looking back, I really wish I mean, I'm happy with how things have kind of evolved, but that was just me being a stupid ninth grader who was like didn't want to not be away from his friends. So I
mm,
actually called it quits on the trumpet in ninth grade. And then from ninth grade, all the rest of high school, I didn't do really any of it. And then again, this can be a long evolution here, but then got to college and was super still into listening to music. Um, I loved making playlists on Spotify, sharing it with friends, like would love seeing what other people were listening to and all that. But then sophomore year, after our sophomore year of college, I did an internship in Little Rock. And so in Little Rock, Arkansas, where my grandparents were living at the time and had always lived. But I actually lived with my grandparents that summer because I was working there, and it just made sense for me to stay with them for it was about 8 weeks. But like anything, not many of my friends were in Little Rock for that summer, and so my grandparents were like trying to really keep me entertained. They're like, "What can we do?" Because they knew, none of my friends were there, and I'd go to work, come home, and so I was doing a lot of puzzles with them. We were doing a lot of just random stuff. But then one weekend, they were like, "We should go to this place called Murray's Dinner Theater." In Little Rock, Arkansas. I think it's still there. I'm not sure post COVID, but basically, you go to the buffet, you sit down, and then you eat for a little while, and then a play starts, and it's a show. And that Friday night, it happened to be a play about a traveling bluegrass band. And basically, I'm sitting there watching this guy playing the banjo in front of me. And around the intermission, I just was like, that's interesting. So I pulled out my phone. I was like, how much does a banjo cost? And I had already really liked that kind of music, loved listening to that kind of stuff, but I had never had the thought. I'd always wanted to play the guitar whenever I was younger,
mhm.
but it just never really happened. And so I was like, I got so much free time on my hands. This is like the one point in my life where I've got really nothing else going on. So I think a week later, I went and bought a banjo at the Guitar Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I remember showing up to buy it, and I had called ahead, and the workers in there were like sitting there. They didn't know it was me who called, but they're like, "Man, who would buy a banjo? Like, what the heck?" And then I like walked up to the desk and I was like, "I'm here to pick up a banjo." They're like, "Oh, okay, we'll go get it for you." But yeah, that was kind of the weird sequence of events that after I had not been playing music, that summer was whenever I picked up the banjo. And there's been a lot of evolution since then. A lot of people in my life who have taught me, I've learned from, who've
Mhm.
influenced me is a lot of different things. But yeah, so it was that same story with the artwork, with the visual artwork, where had a lot of it whenever I was younger, even still did some of it. And then silly little middle schooler was just like, nah, I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
But I think truly, I think everybody's kind of got something in their life that, whether you want to call it the purpose or whatever it is, that I think no matter how hard you try, it's going to kind of come, it's going to find a way to come back into your life. And that's eventually what happened with music. So yeah, it's kind of the short version, I guess.
Man, yeah, I had totally forgot about the fact that we played in band together in
Yeah,
middle school, and I was over there playing
that's it.
saxophone.
Yeah,
You're over there playing trumpet, and I made the same foolish mistake of selling my saxophone, and I was just like, once eighth grade finished, and I was done, doing school band, I was just like, I'm never gonna play this thing again. Well, I'm just gonna sell it. I hated band, but now I look back, I'm like, I might have hated being in band class, but I
yeah,
loved playing the saxophone.
exactly.
And I have tried my hand at a couple different instruments, guitar, for example, and a ocarina, which is a little flute thing, and some drum pads, but I just haven't quite picked up music the way that I remembered playing the saxophone. So I definitely want to get one day, but they're kind of expensive, and I haven't pulled the trigger.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Well,
but
you say
oh, go
that, and
ahead.
before we go on, you made me remember, and I think this was us. But do you remember those, specifically in band class? We had like those little pinto beans.
The
And
beans.
we, of course, us being idiots, we were like trying to throw them across the room and get them in the tubas. And
Yeah.
it's like, thinking back, you're causing damage to like something people are renting. But I think back on that, I'm like, wow, I would have, I would have hated to be the teacher. Miss Thomas, she
Hmm.
is absolutely great, and she had to put up with us doing, you know, throwing little pinto beans across the room. So like we were just a bunch of hoodlums at that point, I
Oh
guess.
my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Shout out to Miss Thomas. Your patience was unbelievable. Putting up with 75 14 and 15-year-olds throwing dried pinto beans across the class when we're supposed to be, performing Mozart. So that, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that.
uh,
But fun times. I am curious about, so you saw this performance, you're listening to, some bluegrass and that types of music, saw this performance of the banjo live and just pulled the trigger on buying the banjo.
yeah.
How did you start to learn how to play it? Like, what was the process of, taking that home for the first time and then beginning to learn it to the point to where you're able to create your own music from scratch with the banjo? What was that? What did that process look like?
I remember coming home with it for the first time, whenever I got back to my grandparents' house that night, and basically I opened up the box, and on a banjo, it's called the bridge. Basically, the strings were on it, but then the wooden bridge that actually holds the strings up, and then basically transfers to the head of the banjo. It came separate, which is how it is. But me not knowing anything about it, I was like, oh, what? So like the first thing was I had to watch about 10 YouTube videos. I was sitting there with like a ruler in my grandparents' living room while they were watching TV, and I was like trying to measure it out, and I got it up. I tuned it, which from band, the experience, it's like I didn't ever play a stringed instrument, but I kind of had the concept of, I could tune an instrument and kind of do that. So I was sort of confident, but I was like, I had never played a guitar, never done anything.
Hmm.
And so even just the mere getting it out of the box and getting it up to pitch and trying to just be able to make a sound out of it was very daunting because you make a
Mhm.
purchase and you're like, oh God, what did I just do? But really, so I would come home from work and I would sit out on the back porch. Sometimes this was in July, so it's like 102 degrees in central
Ooh.
Arkansas at that point. But like I'd come home after work and it'd be getting a little cooler, so I'd sit outside. But my grandpa actually went to the store with me. They had like this old swing that was kind of falling apart, so we went to the store. He bought a new swing because he's like, we got to have something out here. Put it on the back deck, and we would hang out there, and they would put up with me making some awful noises out of that thing. But I would come home, it'd be hot as hell outside. I'd sit out there and I'd just start picking up the banjo. I would, a lot of it, like anything else, is you look up videos. There's an abundance of people on YouTube who are kind enough to offer their knowledge for free. Also, my grandpa went to the library, bought a How to Play the Banjo book that I still have. I eventually returned it to the library and bought it online because I was like, I
Mhm.
need to be able to take this back with me to Fayetteville. But a lot of it started out that way to where I was kind of on my own for the first 6 months of playing the banjo. But yeah, it was just this process of coming home. I was thinking about it a lot of in the same terms as like playing tennis or playing basketball or playing baseball. Muscle memory is muscle memory. And so
Mhm.
you do anything, you figure out what you're supposed to be doing. And if you repeat that over and over and over, eventually, even though I can't do it right now, I knew I had this weird motivation in my head. I was like, I'm just going to get the basics of this down to where I can have a solid foundation. And you kind of hinted at it for the first part of me playing it. I just wanted entertainment. I was like, I just want to be able to do this. I just want to prove to myself that I can kind of learn something like this.
Mhm.
But really quickly, I realized that there was a difference between being able to memorize something on the banjo and just kind of regurgitate it, or the guitar or something like that. There's a difference between that and using it as a tool, understanding it, like the fundamentals of it, understanding the music theory. If you really kind of, I'm never going to stop learning about the instrument, but that's always kind of been my goal is to understand it at a
Mhm.
deeper level to where then you can take it. That's what you're doing at a jam. If you go to somebody's back porch, it's like you have the understanding of how it's structured, and then you take what somebody else is doing and you can kind of join in.
Mm.
And eventually that turned into like, I want to be able to use this instrument as a tool to write songs and actually create music rather than just regurgitating something really. And so
Yeah.
that, like I said, that has taken a long time to do, and I am nowhere near there yet. But that's kind of always the goal and sight. It's I'll always be chasing it for the rest of my life of being able to actually understand the instrument. But yeah, it's this. You just got to start somewhere, and I had this. It was a weird motivation in me to where I was like something. I was like, "There's no way I'm just going to be able to quit this after 6 months." Like I knew it was going to keep on going. Like I just had this weird confidence in it. So yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool. So I'm gonna there's I want to ask more about some of this music journey, but I want to just take a moment and kind of reflect on a few things that I feel like I'm picking up on what you said. And it seems like there's almost this theme. And I'm gonna struggle to communicate it, I think, but a theme that you shared between cooking and drawing and then learning the banjo, and that you kind of shared this theme of wanting to understand kind of fundamentally how these things work, and kind of doing so from watching people that are the best at that thing. So whether it's the guy cooking with his GoPro to these artists who, you're looking at their books for the pen and the paper, to these people on YouTube. So watching and learning from the people that are the best at whatever subject it is, learning the fundamentals and the kind of underlying rules of these art forms, and then diving in deeper and being able to create from that. I'm seeing this common thing that you've used across all of these interests and passions in your life to like really great effect. Like you've been able to kind of dissect what are some of the most important fundamentals of, a banjo or of cooking or of this pen and paper drawing, and then, take that further. So I just think that's a really cool kind of theme that, I picked up as you were talking. And, as you're going through these different areas of interest in your life, it seems like you've been able to do that. And, the way you're describing, using cooking as a, art form or a tool, or your sketches, of course, is just an art form and a tool. And the banjo and playing an instrument, being able to express, what you want to express with that as a tool. It's almost like all of these kind of art forms are like a separate language, if you will, and a
Yeah.
way to communicate something that, is just inherent to yourself. But it requires you to really learn these tools very deeply in order to do that. So just wanted to take a moment. It feels like it's a really cool theme that's like shown up between all these different kind of art forms that you've done.
Yeah, man. No, that's awesome that you say that. I think maybe I've observed that in other people of watching other people, but yeah, that is a cool thing because I really do view people who are amazing cooks like that's an art in itself. So yeah, that
Mhm.
is a cool thing to kind of think about.
Yeah. Okay. So I have one more kind of question before we kind of dive into some of the music that you've put out recently and kind of how that happened. Um, but one of the things that I feel like that comes up whenever I talk to people who are artists and creatives is the kind of tension of perfectionism. And so there are some people, whenever you're creating art, who are so hard on themselves. And whether that's, pen on paper, every stroke needs to be perfect. Whether that's cooking is where my perfectionism really comes out. And like every detail of a dish has to be just like perfectly placed. And I'll spend, a whole day making some sort of dish, give it to my friends and family and eat it myself, and everyone's saying how good it is, and all I can think about is like the tiny things that I messed up along the way. Is kind of perfectionism in your art, in your music, in cooking, is that something that you kind of contend with? Is Do you put a lot of pressure on yourself to create, the perfect type of art, or is, that something that, doesn't seem to bother you a ton? Are you, pretty carefree whenever you're able to make stuff?
No, man, it kills me. I think no matter what, I don't think I've ever met anybody who's, well, maybe some people are just really good at that. I am absolutely, it eats me up. And it's like, especially like you say, cooking specifically, I think it applies to probably everything. Whenever you're trying to just create something or produce it, or especially if you're sharing it with other people. Like I said, whenever you go from just doing something for yourself. You can still be a perfectionist, but then whenever you start broadcasting it to people or wanting to give it kind of an audience, then you're like, wow, now I'm really kind of thinking about it. I can think specifically with drawing, there is like this weird thing that happens to where I can, and as I'm doing a drawing, I'm typically like listening to music in the background, or I have a TV show on in the background or a movie.
Hmm.
And I have this hyper fixation of I almost like whatever I'm listening to, I attach visually with what I'm doing. And so like as I'm doing a drawing, I can literally look at drawings and remember what it was I was listening to or watching at that point, like specific parts of the drawing too, which sounds
What?
weird. It sounds really weird, but it's like something visually, the way your brain kind of like molds it
Uh-huh.
together. But the same thing goes with like I can look at like there's a drawing right here on my wall that I did that it's one of my favorite drawings, but there are specific things on it that still I look at and I'm like, oh my God, I could have done that better. Or
Mm,
there, you make mistakes whenever, especially with like a pen or painting, you got to learn
mhm.
how to be able to just kind of roll with it. Because if you put 10 or 15 hours into a drawing and then one wrong thing, you have to be able to like either live with it or learn how to fix it. And
Mm,
so that's kind of visual art. Same thing with music's exactly the same thing, especially whenever it comes to recording, which I've been learning a lot about. But um, I think that's something I'm trying to learn to let go of. Is there's a perfect recording of like a perfect song. There's no, you can't hear any inconsistencies,
mhm,
which can be good in a way. But then there is an honest, true, authentic
mm,
performance that could actually be more powerful than something that's just crispy, clean, like no wrong notes or anything.
yeah,
And so specifically with recording music, I'm trying to get better about like if there is a take where maybe there's something wrong with it, but it adds kind of character to it. I'm trying to
mhm,
learn how to be okay with that, because sometimes your reflex is to be like, no, let's do that again. But um, in reality, a lot of the songs that I listen to, I listen back to, and I'm like, oh, you can kind of hear stuff going all over the place, but that's what like makes it the song that you love.
mm,
So yeah, no, I'm terrible about it, but I think that's another lifelong journey that you learn to try and deal with. But,
yeah. Yeah, you were saying that about, recording, and some of my favorite songs on Spotify are songs that were re-recorded at, Spotify studios.
yes.
And from the listening experience, they're the kind of let quote less perfect versions
Yep.
as the ones that were the full song released originally.
Yep.
And almost all the songs that are re-recorded and through Spotify studios, and they still sound great. They're not bad songs by any mean, but like that character, that it just, there's something different that feels real, and they're some of my favorite songs. So yeah, I mean, that's cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. The perfectionism definitely can get us all, and I know that people that are creating, have a high creative output such as yourself, it can definitely be, a devil on your shoulder for better or for worse. So definitely something I'm contending with as well.
Yeah, man.
But so you talked through, you got your banjo, you're living at your grandparents' house in Little Rock. You started to play it, you watch YouTube videos, have practiced it, have this dream further down the road of becoming a master perhaps at the banjo. When did you begin to either write out lyrics or sing, or where did it go from just kind of picking and learning the banjo to actually starting to create music for the first time?
I think when I started out, I think I said at the beginning of it really was just kind of a entertainment thing. I wasn't picking up the banjo to be like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to learn how to write a song, and then I'm going to go like do this. It was more of just kind of a creative outlet, which still obviously is, but it was more of just I want to see if I can do this.
Hmm.
Um, and as I got further into it, just the natural flow of things were I would learn how to play a song, and then we'd be sitting at Thanksgiving with all my family, and they'd be like, "Go get your banjo," and then I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure," and then come back in, you play for people, and playing for family is very different than maybe playing for a bunch of strangers, because they're always going to be like, "Yeah, great job," but I started doing this and I started to view it more as like, wow, with this, I can pick up this tool and with just me and this banjo or me and a guitar, you can entertain people and you can provide them with this experience that you wouldn't be able to without it. And so I started viewing it more along those lines. I still was kind of I mean, still always going to be nervous playing, so there's always a tad bit of nerves, but that kind of stuff was really hard at first. I wouldn't say that necessarily came natural, but the more I did it, the more I realized there was a desire for it. And
Hmm.
so that was what led into further doing, like wanting to share it with people. And then whenever I got back to Fayetteville from my grandparents' house, that was just for the summer. I started to be like, okay, maybe I should try and find somebody who could give me lessons because YouTube's great, but it'd be awesome to like sit in a room with somebody else who actually knows how to play the banjo. And
Mhm.
so went to a store down the road actually, and that was February of 2018. I remember that really specifically. But I looked through a list on a website of these people they had as like instructors, and there was a guy named Walter Schmidt, who stuck out to me. He had been teaching for a long time, and so I was like, let me call you. And I was like, can I start out with doing lessons? And they were like, yeah, he has an opening tomorrow at 9 a.m. I was like, okay, I'll do, I think it was Tuesdays at 9 a.m. once a week for 30 minutes basically.
Mhm.
And started going to that. And it was this crazy kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, where I was sitting there in a room playing this, we were starting to talk about music, and having somebody sitting there kind of encouraging me all of a sudden brought me back to band in sixth grade, what we'd be doing there. It brought me back to what it was like to practice. At that time, I was in college, so everything was always like school, school, school. But to have an assignment that was for music, I was like, well, this is
Mm.
cool. And so that just further, that got me plugged in basically. And through
Mhm.
that, Walter would be like, hey, we're going to do a recital, and it's going to be all of my students. And basically, we would show up on a Saturday, like I think it was once every 6 months. But the first one, I show up, and all of his other students were probably 7 years old to maybe 12 years old. And here I was, a 20-year
Wow.
old college student. And I'm sitting in the audience next to, I've got like three kids next to me who are, I think, like a 6-year old, a 10-year old, and a 9-year old. And they all have like their ukulele or their guitar, and I'm
Mhm.
just like, "Oh god." But then how nervous I was to get up on stage and play my piece, I was like, "This is not easy, no matter who you're playing for, to get up here and you could know something as well as possible back to front, but then you get up there and your hands shake and you're like, "Oh, I can't do it." And so, I would all that to say, the performance piece is something that still trying to hone. That's something, as I think you get older, you learn your stage presence, you learn how to be comfortable playing for other people, and
Mhm.
that's a real joy to kind of figure out. But that was kind of how I got started. And then Walter would basically be like, "Hey, come over to my friend's house. It's a back porch jam." And I'd show up there. That's how I met another guy named Gary Cooper. And I actually ended up still play with them. But in 2019, Walter started a band with me and Gary and another guy named Terry. And so this whole thing just kind of snowballed to where once I finally got plugged in with somebody through
Mhm.
lessons, he was like, "You should get out here. You should start playing for people." And then that was around the same time that I got into songwriting. And so the whole thing just started out where it was like, I'm just doing this in my bedroom to try and entertain myself, to, oh, I love doing this for other people. And then, oh, there's a craft, there's an understanding of the instrument. And so I think the same way that once I got into pen and ink drawing, you start to see that there's more there, and you just
Mm.
keep digging, and then it becomes an obsession the same way that you probably have felt with cooking. It's like
Mhm.
there's always another new pepper grinder you can buy. There's always another new thing that you can get. I mean, that's how people spend their lives. There's something you dig into. And so it's
Mhm.
been a real joy, kind of that evolution of music and songwriting and performing. Yeah.
That's super cool. Gosh, man, and that makes me want to take a music lesson
Oh, you
myself.
got to.
Because I feel like one of those things is I've tried to learn guitar and some music on my own, and typically I consider myself a pretty disciplined person, but for some reason when it comes to music, I haven't been able to set myself like goals or the repetition of practice that I can do again and again that gets me through that first initial like learning curve to that first aha moment that like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I'm playing this instrument. I think lessons actually would be a really great way to start and like begin kind of down that path.
Oh, yeah. No,
Um,
there's some honestly, there can be sometimes nothing more frustrating than sitting there trying to play an instrument, because I would have to remind myself, I'd be like, "Okay, I'm doing this because I enjoy it." Like, I need to take a step away, like, stop getting so worked up about not being able to play certain things. So, yeah.
hmm Yeah. Well, once you've gotten like plugged in, how was the process of creating your first, song you released on Spotify, Quarantine Blues, I believe it was. So, it sounds like you started really getting plugged in 2018 or so, and then 2 to 3 years later, 2020, 2021 hits. What kind of was the start of creating something, recording something, publishing that for the world to hear?
Yeah, as far as writing goes, I think so. Even as far back as like freshman year, sophomore year, even before I played music, I've always been, I've always loved. I don't necessarily, it doesn't even have to be called journaling, but just writing down things, just trying to document. And that could be to-do lists. I always kind of basically keep one notebook at a time. In college, I would split it up by semester. I would have one notebook that I carried with me, and I would just write everything from my school to do. I would write down,
Mm,
you know, thoughts and feelings. I would write down songs that I wanted to remember to listen to later. Like, just, I love the process of writing all this stuff down. One, because I could come back and look at it. And two, because writing stuff down helped me process a lot better than anything else. Like, it just forces you to actually think your own thoughts
mhm,
in a more process, rather than just a big jumble. And so if you do that, it forces you to actually put it out in a more orderly way. And so in a way, I don't think I didn't think I was writing songs, but in a way, I think that's exactly what I was doing, was putting thoughts down on paper. Maybe it didn't rhyme at that
mhm,
point yet. Songs don't even have to rhyme, but I think it was that process that I was still doing. But then once music came back into my life, and specifically playing an instrument, that kind of then gave what I was already doing an outlet to then turn that into songs, kind of sketches and stuff like that. And
mhm,
so for me, there was a point where I probably was like, okay, I would like to turn this into a song, because it was already a process I was doing a lot. And so once, I think the only way to learn how to do it is by learning other people's songs. And so, specifically, me, something I really enjoyed doing, like back in 2018, around that time, I would just get in my car and turn on like a John Prine album, and just I would drive around Fayetteville like the longest way I possibly could, and just listen to the songs and like dissect the writing in my head, and like try and listen for the chord changes and like understand phrasing and stuff like that. And then, I'd listen to a Bob Dylan album, and I'd look up the chords and like try and listen and like see what the chords are doing, and just understanding the structure of what they were doing. And then, I mean, I've heard a lot of interviews with other artists who started out to where you literally take somebody else's music and you just put your own words to it. And I would do that a lot too. But that's kind of just the evolution.
yeah,
The other kind of the way I've put it, whenever I was really young, I used to draw like floor plans of houses, or at least I would try to. And at first, I would just draw a big box, and I'd put a little room in the corner and a room in the corner. I didn't really understand how it worked. And then I was like, oh wait, these boxes fit together in a way that then formed the outside perimeter. And it was just by repetition of doing it the wrong way enough times where you eventually kind of got there. Not to say that I ever did it the right way. But same thing was kind of true for me with songwriting, to where I was like, okay, that's what I'm aiming for. I wrote probably a lot of, I, I would say that they couldn't even be called songs necessarily. I would write them and like try and play them, but then eventually, I think they started forming into what could be called more actual songs. There's a few, or specifically on that first EP, that I released, there's one called Coffee Getting Cold, that
mm,
to me was kind of about that process of driving around. But that was a really old song that I had written from, that had kind of evolved over a couple of years. And so
wow,
ones like that were kind of earlier on in the process.
mhm,
And so I had, honest, all this stuff that I had written, basically, some of it needed to be kind of refined into, to be able to turn into a song. Some maybe was done, and was kind of like ready to actually be called a song. But in 2020, yeah, I guess 2020, around the time the pandemic happened, that was one of the ones where Quarantine Blues, I wrote that because I was like, oh, I got to do something productive. It'd be funny if I wrote song called Quarantine Blues. But then that song kind of paired with a few others. I was like, I would love to do something with these that I've kind of built up here. And I was also in this songwriters club where I would write a song at that point, a song every month, and then send it out to an email chain, and everybody would like do the same thing. But basically, all this kind of culminated to where I was like, there's a project here that I want to do something with, um, and that's what eventually led to that EP, um, and me actually recording. So a
Yeah.
long, long process for that one.
Oh, that's super cool. I loved, love the idea of you, once again, kind of learning from some masters and like learning the fundamentals and the structures behind how true masters of the craft have done what they've done,
Yeah,
dissecting that and kind of building it up from scratch. And the idea of, the song, Coffee Getting Cold, which is, one of my favorites on, Past and Gone, is that's something that wasn't like a eureka, you sit down for 15 minutes and write out the song, but something that came from this habit of writing, and over time you're able to work with it, mold it, craft it up to where it is today.
yeah,
um and as you're talking about this, there's this idea that I like to think about whenever, specifically I think about it for business and business ideas, but I think it applies across the board. And typically I say, I'll ask people, what it takes to create a good business idea? And, they'll say what? And I'll say 100 bad business ideas. And I think probably that same kind of idea works when it comes to creating art and creating music. Is, what does it take to make something really good? Well, it's to make a whole bunch of things that suck first, and eventually through that process of failing and learning and trial and error, you come out on the other side with, those few gems that have been able to be built up over time to be something that are truly special. So it
yeah.
is cool hearing that it sounds like, a similar process has kind of been, what you've used to get your first album and first music pieces out.
Yeah, I think the goes back to what we were talking about perfectionism, specifically writing. You have to be able to write a bad song. But for me, it was always tough because I was like, this is not good. And so I wouldn't want to finish it. But then whenever you
Hmm.
don't finish it, you can't move forward. So I never wanted to put the stamp on a bad song and be like, that's done. And I still struggle with that. But what I've found is like, even if it's a, quote, bad song, or if you're not like amazed by your own work, just being able to say, okay, I'm gonna call that a song, and I'm gonna put it, and it'll sit there. But then, yeah, just doing that over and over and over and over and over again, and then maybe you look back and you're like, oh wait, that one actually might be one I want to kind of keep with me. And so, yeah,
Hmm.
there's that process where you have to be okay with some not so impressive stuff on your own end, I think.
Yeah. Um, you know, when you released your full EP, so Past and Gone, and people can go and search Riley McGill on Spotify, or I'm sure wherever you listen to music, and find that. Definitely recommend giving it a listen, and giving some voice and music and soul to the conversation that we're having today. And I know you'll enjoy it. Um, what were your expectations, if you had any, for putting this out into the world? Was this a project that you just felt was in your heart, in your soul? You were doing this for yourself and just had to get this out there. Did you expect anyone to listen to it? Like, what were the thoughts and expectations as you were recording this in, studios and putting it together and getting ready to release? And how did that, kind of coincide with the reality of once you actually put it out into the world? Like, what did people say about it?
Yeah, I think same way that whenever I was afraid to do drawings for other people, because it takes a little bit of audacity to be like, here, I think you would like this, or to look at this, or here, I think you would like to listen to this, to share it with people. It's kind of crazy because you're like, here, you need this, but That wasn't necessarily, that's just kind of how I thought about it was, um, I had this collection of songs that meant a lot to me. But I was like, what do I do with it? Because is recording it really what I need to be doing? Like, is there
Mm,
enough meaning there? And that was what was kind of keeping me, I was struggling with what's the next step as far as kind of the journey. And at that time, a lot of stuff obviously was going on because the pandemic. It wasn't like you could go out and necessarily play in front of people. Even still, I was like, I don't even think people know I play music. So I was like, is this like a good move for me? But basically, I was driving, I think I was in Little Rock for Thanksgiving that year and driving back, and I was just like, you know what, I really want to do this. I think I had a few hours in the car to really kind of hammer it into my own head. But there was a guy, his name's Daniel Matthews. That was a mutual friend at the time, now a good friend. But um, I had his name that one of my other friends had basically given me. I knew that he had recorded music before, and I was like, I'm going to send him a text. And basically, whenever I got home, I was like, hey, I want to do an EP, about 5 or 6 songs, real simple, me, guitar, banjo, my
mhm,
songs, and then maybe get like somebody to come in, play drums or bass to kind of, for a little ear candy, make it sound a little bit more done up. And he did music production. And so he was like, yeah, let's talk. So I think that was November. He's like, let's talk after the new year. And I was like, sounds
mhm,
good. And then we got back together. He's like, here's what we could do. And we kind of set out what the goal was. And it, once I brought somebody else in, kind of the same way whenever I started taking lessons, like once you bring somebody else in, you have a little bit of accountability and you're like,
mhm,
I guess I'm going to actually do this now. But we kind of set out the way we are going to do it. So I was living in a house at that time that had this upstairs room that was empty, and so I would go upstairs. I basically took a week and a half off work. I used my PTO, and I was like, this is going to be my recording session. And so every day I would wake up, go upstairs, track some banjo, track some guitar, finish like do one song per day basically. Took my
mhm.
time. At the end of the day, I'd go to Maxine's, off the square, and I'd sit there and I'd write in my book. I'd have a drink and be like, okay, here's what I got done today. What am I going to do tomorrow? And then do the exact same thing. And that was me kind of like tracking all the instruments and stuff. And then I'd go over to Daniel's house. We'd record vocals there, and then he did all the mixing and the mastering for me. And so it was a very, very kind of homemade process. I was using like this. I've still got the mic. It's a Blue Yeti. Same
Mhm,
thing I used to use whenever I play Minecraft with my friends, like to talk to them. And like a lot of podcasters use it. But I was not like using amazing equipment, but that's something that I love about it was the fact that it was in the upstairs room of my house on not great equipment, but we something together I was really proud of. Got my friend Hans Corbell to play bass, and then a guy named John Rhodes played drums on it. And there's this theme of I would meet somebody, they would kind of help me do something or learn something, and then they'd introduce me to somebody else. And so
mhm,
John, who played drums, now owns his own recording business, and I record with him. He does whenever I record songs now, I work with him, and he does all the audio production and stuff like that. So it's just this thing that where I've done one thing, it led me to another, met somebody, and kind of I'm learning as I go as far as the whole process because I still know nothing about about songwriting, recording the whole industry and the business of it. But that's the fun part about it is just kind of learning. And then whenever they would be doing stuff, they'd be like, "Here, watch this. Show me kind of how to do it." And so
mhm.
it's a really organic way of doing things that has been really fun. But yeah, that was kind of the process of the first EP. So.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love too how, it sounds like, your perspective is, some people might put on a bucket list, for example, that one of their bucket list items is to create a song or an album and post it on Spotify. And at that point, they might check it off their bucket list and say, okay, I've done it. But it's cool to hear your perspective and just saying, and for better or for worse, it can be agonizing in your own mind, I'm sure. But saying, hey, you've created music, you've already gone a really long distance, but you're still looking ahead at, all this room for improvement, all
Yeah.
this room for further mastery. How far can you take this skill? How deep can you dig in? And just being sounds like you're almost more excited about the improvement and learning and process rather than the finished result, even though it does sound like you are pretty proud and happy with the result of the first album.
Yeah, no, there's always you like to stand in there, kind of look back and appreciate whatever you created. But I think that's the joy of it. And kind of talking about like learning an instrument. There are guys like John Prine, who I already mentioned. There's a guy named John Hartford. He was an incredible banjo player. Norman Blake on the guitar. Like there are these people that I see who spent their entire lives basically mastering an instrument or mastering, whatever it was their craft, but they specifically were like understanding at a deep level of what they were doing. And I think that's kind of
Hmm.
always the goal is to be able to one day maybe get to that. But there's this chase of that I think is
Hmm.
what makes it so just invigorating to just keep on, what's next, what's next. And so you want to create stuff that's authentic and that you're proud of, but I think it's always trying to improve and whatever's kind of on the horizon there. So
Yeah. Well, speaking of what's next, you've put out this music. It sounds like you're still really loving the process, creating music, drawing, cooking from time to time. Do you have, a set path ahead of you for what you're doing next? Are you kind of just following where your passion, interest, energy takes you, or kind of what is the next season for Riley looking like? And do you have, let's say a plan or a direction you're heading in?
yeah, I think always good to have a structure and keep yourself in line. Right now, especially as I mean, just timeline wise, after COVID, things started really opening up more. So there's a lot more ability. Like I was talking about, what I really love is playing in front of people, and so
Hmm.
any and every opportunity I'm getting to go out and actually be able to play for people, play a show, I've gone I a long time ago I started playing at farmers markets because you're standing there on a corner. People have no choice but to listen as they're walking by, and it's like no matter
Yeah.
if you suck, they're going to at least hear you for about 15 seconds while they walk by. So any and every opportunity, really, just to get out and play. That's kind of where I'm at of trying to just be able to share that with people. Is what I
Hmm.
love. Recording specifically, yeah. So I had put out another song. I guess that was 6 months ago, almost now, or probably about five. And then most recently, just finished recording a couple more songs for what's going to probably eventually become a two-song EP. Still kind of in the process of finishing up some tracking for that, and then we'll get into the mixing and everything. So a lot of stuff on the plate, on the radar as far as that goes. But yeah, I think that's what there's a lot of stuff going on, trying to set that goal, yeah, of keep on moving on and seeing what's next. But just really kind of enjoying that right now. So plenty of stuff coming though, definitely.
Awesome. That's exciting. Well, I can't wait to hear some of the new music. Take
Yeah,
your time. Make sure it gets that perfectionism
oh,
right
yeah,
before you release it.
better believe it.
Um, Well, Riley, we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story. It has been,
Yeah,
inspiring as ever to hear, how you've talked, found these things you're passionate about, grew into those and through those and kind of have just dug deeper into the things you're interested in to, do more of that with your life. So I wanted to start to bring us towards a close. I do have a handful of just questions that maybe are a little bit more rapid fire, maybe not. Don't feel a need to rush through the answers, but the first is, you're doing all this creative work. You're drawing. You're creating plenty of music. and all this stuff, but you're also, have a full time job. And I just wanted to ask you a question about how do you, manage to balance, a career and working full time for, a really great company, as well as, having enough fuel in the tank, energy left over to do creative things that you love to do. How is there any particular strategies you found that enables you to balance that type of lifestyle?
Yeah. I think specifically whenever I got out of college, I was at this weird, and you probably felt the same way, and a lot of different things, but I was like, well, I've got this passion, and how do you begin to balance it with, what you're doing, maybe for your, quote, day job or whatever it is. And like you said, I've been very fortunate to get to work with a lot of great people and a great place. And so it's been this thing to where you can find a lot of joy in, maybe because I don't do, quote, art and music for, the full-time job, and it's very different than what I actually do for full-time job with, business analytics basically. But once I dove into that job right out of college, I realized that there were ways to apply these same things that we were talking about, whether that be kind of digging into one thing, trying to understand it at a deeper level, getting creative with that. I started learning how I could actually apply these things creatively to that work. And in that way, you can actually get that deeper sense of appreciation for what you're doing. I think the key is I'm just really happy to be around people that I love working with, and doing that. But yeah, there's this intersection of being able to spend enough time with your quote side projects and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Obviously, you're working full time too, as well as being able to manage podcasts and making really great TikToks and stuff like that. And it's just I think it's this crazy thing about being young to where you are just kind of going through that. And I struggled with it for a long time, but now it's just something that I really enjoy having a lot of different parts of my life to where I'm challenged in different ways. So really happy with that right now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing. The other kind of question, a little bit of a follow up on that is, in your ideal world, maybe you can think of this as a day off, or perhaps if there's a world where you do eventually step away from, your full time job, what does the perfect day for Riley McGill look like? Yeah, whether that's a day off or a day in the world where you are, a full-time creative, if that's, the direction you want to head in.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the ideal situation. I think even in that like ideal future, let's call it ideal, there's still this thing of maybe where you're in your comfort zone of, just spending time by yourself or still challenging yourself.
Mhm.
I tell people this all the time. It's like I would love to be in a van right now, traveling around, just playing house shows, which is like what I'm something I'm trying to get more into is just if you can get a friend in some random city to open up their living room and invite their friends over, that kind of thing is something. But there's a weird thing about traveling and also having your time at home that you can still appreciate.
Mhm.
So that's something that I think is what I would have to deal with. But as far as a perfect day, like if I'm just sitting around here, first I'd get up and I'd go down the street to Onyx Coffee and I'd get me a coffee there, come back. And then for me, like the morning time is specifically whenever I feel the most, uh, like not only do I think clearer, but that's whenever I tend to write more. That's whenever I'm wanting to sit down. I'm always wanting to reach for either the banjo or the guitar. That's whenever I
Mhm.
tend to sit down on the couch and I'm just like wanting to either listen to somebody else play music, and then that inspires me to play. Um, but yeah, being able to do that, or just being able to wake up, like I've got this dream of being able to have, my own space for a studio and actually have not only the music side kind of merge with the visual art, but just a space for that. And so that's kind of something that's, I think, always in the back of my mind, being able to have. But yeah, just that time to be able to wake up in the morning and without too many goals on your plate, being able to just kind of create something. And at the end of that day, if it's you look back, you're like, wow, didn't really create anything very good today, but being able to have that ability to spend that time on something, but then
Mm-hmm.
um, have the freedom to be like, okay, what's tomorrow going to look like?
Hmm.
I think to me, that's something to live for right there. So
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I'll just kind of call out, and you know, I love, talking to people like yourself who, you can ask, what does your perfect day look like? And the first thing you'll get back is something you would never expect, such as playing music in random people's houses. Like that is awesome. It
yeah,
is not what I would choose, but it's great that that is, it sounds like it could be a perfect day. And two, the idea that your perfect day isn't sitting around watching Netflix all day. It's doing things.
but I
And
do
to
a fair
some
share.
people,
I'll say that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And to some people it would, it's work, and like it still is, even to you, even if you enjoy it, like it's work. And so just the idea that, people's perfect day just, can look different to everyone, and it's basically working on the things that are worth working on, to that individual. So that's cool.
yeah.
Well, Riley, I have two last questions. I don't know if they'll go anywhere. But you were talking about your time in Little Rock with your grandparents, and I think a few times specifically you mentioned your grandpa and how he was trying to entertain you and brought you to the show where you watch the play or watch someone play the banjo, help put up a swing on the porch, encouraged you with art and drawing. I don't get to talk to many people who have, a really close relationship with their grandparents, but I wanted to ask the question, what have you learned, if anything, that stands out, from your grandfather? Or, what are, some of the shining moments of that relationship you had with him?
Yeah. So both my grandparents have since passed away, but the ability to have spent that summer, specifically, I look back on that and it's the most special experience. One, I mean, all the music and everything aside of the fact that that's kind of the summer it happened.
Hmm.
But the fact that I got to spend that summer was very eye opening because I realized, wow, I mean, they were already in our lives for all the time growing up. I think I
Hmm.
realized that not everybody does have that, but also the same way we were talking about it, the same way that my immediate family encourages me to do all the art as well as just other areas of my life. But the same way that my grandparents, yeah, there was just this special thing about my grandfather and my grandmother that summer to where it was like I got to spend time with them in the mornings. I'd sit there, I'd wake up, put on my suit for work. My grandma would make breakfast. My grandfather would come out. We'd sit there, we'd work on the puzzle that we were doing. And then we would I'd get ready for work and then I'd come back. But the fact that they were spending time with me while I was doing it, while I was
Hmm.
making horrible noises on the banjo, the fact they were doing that, I think is really special and something that I'm super thankful for. They both set an example. Something my grandfather would always tell me specifically. He anytime I was like leaving, he'd always say, "Take care, Riley." And
Mm.
somebody hearing that might not exactly know what it means, but it was like it's not telling you to be selfish, but it was always you're going to run into situations where maybe something's not working out or something. Uh, Always take it back to take care of yourself and think about kind of the bigger picture there. And so that's still something that kind of rings out in my head every day, whether or not I'm at work or if I'm doing, something. I think that sticks in the back of my head. But yeah, just super thankful for that time and
Mm.
still definitely experience that lives on, that keeps on going. So
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And that's a good reminder to people who still have their grandparents around. A good reminder for myself that, we're all mortal. Our time is going to come. and that, make sure you spend some time with your loved ones, and there's a lot to learn from them. So that's a really special experience. I thank you for sharing. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh yeah.
Well, we're at an hour. I think that's as good a place as any to kind of close up this conversation. Once again, Riley, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. It's super inspiring. Love the work you're doing. I know other people listening in will. For those of you who are listening, we're going to link to Riley's music and Instagram and website and handles below. But Riley, kind of last question: is there anything, any requests of the audience, or any ways people can, contact you, or anything you kind of want to leave people off with?
Oh man, just as far as I've got the website RileyMcGill.com. I do my best to try and be good at social media. That's always sometimes you're trying to keep your head out of social media and into what you're doing, but definitely connected on there on uh, Instagram, all that stuff. If there is, I any and every opportunity to connect with anybody like this, especially this has been a joy. So thanks to you. But yeah, that definitely that's a way to kind of get in touch with me. Or obviously the music and everything is out there. So would love to have anybody be willing to listen and be able to share it with them. So
Perfect. Perfect. Well, once again, we'll have those links below. But Riley, thank you so much for taking the time today. And a few things that I pulled out of the conversation is, for those of you listening, make sure you surround yourself by amazing people. Find the things that you love, learn from the masters, and just make sure that you dig in. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen. And I hope you have a great day.